put this up on YouTube. Wow. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Pulpit. This is Pastor Ron from the Road to Damascus Church. I'm so glad that you guys are here. Those of you who are here with us this evening, I thought it would be real good if we could have my friend, an old dear friend of mine from our days at UC Irvine, Dr. Adisa Ajamu. I've known this brother since I guess you could call it the early mid 80s from UC Irvine, and specifically Sierra Dorm, where we had many laugh-filled nights where there was absolutely no studying going on, but a lot of bagging, a lot of Monopoly playing, a lot of other stuff that we won't get into anymore. But I'm very excited to have this brother here with us. And welcome, Dr. Ajamu. Can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, so man, good to be here with you. You know, folks don't, as you said, we go back like peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah.
When both of us were more Saul than Paul before we hit that Damascus road. I'm a developmental psychologist. I'm currently the founding director for the Center for Black Cultures, Resources and Research at the University of California, Irvine. It's a cultural center, a wellness center, and a research center that is really devoted to exploring the contours, context, and complexities of African-American life and culture, both here and throughout the diaspora. And we're excited about, what we've been trying to do at UC Irvine and the ways in which we try to extend ourselves to the larger community.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. One of the questions that was asked of me about, I was like, well, is this dude a pastor? And I said, no, he's not a pastor per se. And I think from a previous conversation we had that you have ascribed that it's not that you don't believe in Christianity. It's just not how you flow these days. But I feel that regardless of where your orientation of your faith, what you do in our community puts you in a position of leadership because you are ministering to our people just in a different way. And because you are ministering and because you are leading and because you are developing our people, I think this is a perfect and a fitting environment for us to have a discussion because there are ultimately, I think our goals are aligned. I'm going through the gospel of Jesus Christ. You go through the experience and the ancestors and the history of our people coming from the original continent, the original man. And I respect that.
Right.
100%. I got nothing against it, and I'm not threatened by it. It's almost as the discussions I've had with people. I mean, I'm sure you remember when at UCI when we had brother Ashwa Kwesi come through and did his presentation on the African origins of Christianity, and I mean that stuck in my head, and it continues to resonate to this day, and reveals itself to me as I read the Bible. You got anything to say about that?
Yeah, so one of the things I think is that, look, my job as a psychologist is to try and offer insight to Black people writ large, regardless of how they center themselves relative to their religious orientation, right? There's some markers that are still true about us in terms of psychological development that transcend religion. Some of it actually helps us understand how we navigate our religious expression, which I hope we have a chance to talk about, as well. The other part of it is that I'm a firm believer that if someone invites you to their house, you don't have to share their perspective, but you can't disrespect it. That's the other part of it, right? You can't come to somebody's house and be like, and disrespect their religious orientation. But also, like, just to understand, look, the historical context of Christianity in the spirit of our liberation movements, right? Harriet Tubman was very much, a woman of faith who believed that the Holy Spirit was guiding her on her trips back and forth. She relied on the ancestors. She relied on the Holy Spirit. So it was a combination of things. And when you look at the history of our country, many of our revolts were led by folks who were both what we call folks root workers and folks who worked in churches. I think in particular, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this long history in terms of liberation struggles of us relying on both our ancestral kind of legacy and Christianity. And so I think that, it's appropriate for all of us who are really talking about how we help our folks elevate to use all of the tools at our disposal. And part of reason why I was excited to be on a program is because I think that as we try to navigate COVID-19, as we navigate sort of what I call the ritual sacrifice of Black folks here in America, part of it is also our ability to survive is also about our ability to make good decisions. And good decisions are a function of having quality information. So
right.
the better the information, the better you are to make decisions, and so part of that's, what I hope to be able to do here. And in that sense, I do think that it is a ministry because it's speaking to people's spirit, and it's enlivening them in a way that allows them to be in control of their destiny.
Right. I agree with you 100% because it was this past weekend when I texted you of a memory that I had from way back. Can I talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of people I'm sure there are a lot of people who know, and there's probably a lot of people who don't know, but there was at one point in time you were studying to become a preacher. And matter of fact, the reason why I text you was because I had this flashback of that time we went to your church while you were giving a sermon. And it had struck when I heard you on the radio the other day. It was like, this brother's actually right doing what preachers are supposed to be doing. Because we got a lot of people who stand up in a pulpit on Sunday, but they ain't doing much. They're there and they're collecting the check, they're building monstrous buildings, but they ain't doing nothing. As opposed to you who are out there day in and day out, still making it happen and doing something. Here's a question, bro. What is it that Christians have against believing in our ancestors?
Well, I think that part of it is that Christianity, has weaponized whiteness. And so the early images that we get of Christ, the ones that are commissioned by Pope Julius II, the ones that we see that are based on Michelangelo's cousin, are the images that sort of drive the way that we think about Christianity, the way we think about being Christ-like. So in some ways, it has set up almost a psychological dynamic, and I can talk about this in terms of anchoring in a moment, but it is set up, it is imprinted in us a notion that to be divine is to be like whiteness, and to be in the antithesis of that is blackness, so that anything that's associated with blackness is already subconsciously connected to the idea of the devil and so on and so forth. So there's a way in which we have been conditioned, and socialized. Even those of us who consider ourselves to be really progressive, when you close your eyes, you try to imagine Jesus, you still see a white person.
Right.
And that has some impact on our ability. The other part of it is just the ways in which Christianity has been politicized in a way that it has emphasized docility when it comes to Black folks, but it emphasized aggression when it comes to white folks. So if you look at how COVID-19 is playing out in terms of the folks who are stepping out, white folks who are protesting, about opening churches and so on and so forth, they're doing that in the sense of a revolutionary Jesus that they see as one who was aggressive. We're doing as a Jesus that is one of turn the other cheek. And I would implore folks to really go back and look that Jesus was revolutionary, right? Like if you think about him turning over the table in the den of money changers. I don't care where you are. If you go to any swap meet and folks are vending and somebody come and turn the table over, there ain't no act of peace. You know what I'm saying? That's not somebody come and turn your joint over. There ain't no act of peace. That's fine.
Right.
So, right, and then there's Paul in his letter to the Ephesians, put on the armor of God, right? There's in the Bible there is this prescription about fighting for what you believe in. And I think that not enough of our churches are preaching that part of Jesus as a revolutionary, and the folks who walk with Jesus as being part of a revolution, ushering in not only a new way of being, but willing to fight for that. And I think that part is where we need to really start reorienting our folks.
It's funny because I actually did a sermon. Our church theme this year has been called Revolutionary Love, because the idea of Jesus being a revolutionary in how he conducted himself, but also this idea of compassion and love for our all fellow man, that breaks this idea of that me being able to point to anybody and say, you're a sinner and I'm saved by grace. And because my sins are not as bad as yours, the way I see it, then I have everything entitled to me or guaranteed for me in salvation, and you don't. Uh, I had a discussion with a friend of mine several years back. And I said, why is it that we look at Jesus as being basically milk toast when we really think about it? But if you are critical about the thinking, just as you said, when he goes in and turns over these tables, or just the fact that he could go out and talk to 5,000 people at a time as the Sermon on the Mount, he had to be some big brother who's out there with a big booming voice, not this soft, weak, passive little dude.
Right.
And in fact that he incited fear in a lot of these people, kind of like we do today, right?
Yeah, and to me, it's like, you know, again, the question is always about you choose the Jesus that fits well with your own temperament. So if you ain't about that, like, you know, fight back life, then you want the docile Jesus, because that gives you cover to be docile.
Right.
If you are more like Nat Turner or Denmark Vesey or Ida B. Wells or Harriet Tubman, then you want that you're looking at the Jesus as the revolutionary. And part of it is, to me, I think with the church is coming up short is that we have taken the faith and made it an individual march to salvation rather than a collective march. Like the Great Commission in Matthew talks about the whole idea of like salvation is a collective experience, not an individual thing. It's like, it ain't about you just getting yours, right? So, because you think about it, if you got to heaven, it was just you, you'd be like, well, look, man, I don't know if I want to stay here, like by myself, you know, just me and God kicking it all day. I don't know if that's a good look, you know, where everybody else at? So, so there's a part of it that basically, but when we think about like, well, I'm going to heaven, you're going to heaven. But the reality is that even when we think about heaven, we think about heaven as a place where it's a communal experience. But we operate in our faith like it's an individual endeavor. Like, you know, I'm gonna get saved. It's about my salvation. And to me, the thing has to be that we all get free, or none of us get free. And
no, go ahead, finish that.
So we all get free, or none of us get free, and that means that basically, part of your walk is about showing people the light of your walk, right? So to me, it's less about what you say and then more about what you do. Because most of the time, when you find somebody that's living their life a certain way, you will ask questions like, "So what is it that you're doing?" Right? You don't even have to preach to them. The fact that folks feel that proselytization is a critical component speaks to the fact that maybe you're not walking in a way that your light itself invites inquiry.
Wow.
Right? So to me, that's part of it. Like, you know, you see somebody, if they're doing well in their life, you always, you know, somebody is having a good relationship with their wife, you brothers pull each other to the side, like, man, so what you doing? Like why is your situation harmonious? So there's I think that part of it is also about, like, you know, your faith should be demonstrated in your walk, how you show up in the world. If you got to tell people that you're a Christian, if you got to proselytize to them, maybe the fact is that you're not actually walking in a way that you should be.
Oh, dude, that is right out of something I just taught recently. No, maybe a little while ago in Bible study. You know, because you hear people all the time when it comes to witnessing. No one wants to really talk about God, and I actually had several people that would say, "Well, I want my life to be an example." And the very next question I always ask them, "Well, has anybody ever come to Christ because your life was such a shining example?" And I can tell you, no one has ever converted anybody by the way they live their life, because their lives are foul as the next man.
Right.
And that's where we came up when I prayed about this theme, revolutionary love. Is we are all in the same boat. Right. None of us are better than the other. And part of our problem, or at least the way I see it, part of our problem has been is that individualistic viewpoint of just that American spirit. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps to be successful. And we have adopted that in the church. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get your salvation, because I'm getting mine.
Right. You know, one of the things I talked about in the radio program on Wednesday was about this concept called anchoring. And I'll just explain it for your audience. So the way that anchoring works is that once a particular idea gets imprinted in your consciousness, you evaluate everything else according to that idea. So if you decide that you want to buy a flat screen TV and you see it listed in an online ad for $550, and you make up your mind that you're going to buy that TV, every other TV that you look at, you will evaluate according to that $550 mark. So you will either decide if it's over 550, you will decide that basically it's not in your frame of reference. It's too far below 550. You'll see that it's not good. But at no time are you ever evaluating the quality of the TV. The price is determining how you move going forward. So how that works in the real world, and I use this example in COVID-19, is that we started talking about the coronavirus like it was the flu. And once people accepted that, once that idea got imprinted on their consciousness, they then evaluated all the information they got about the coronavirus like it was the flu. And so people stopped, so when it's flu season, we don't stop going to the stores. We don't do social distancing. We don't stop going to Popeyes, because it's flu season, we just learn to live with it, right? So when you see Black folks out doing what they're doing, you're like, well, how can they not be sheltered in place? It's because a certain idea had been imprinted on their consciousness. And that idea then becomes the mechanism by which you evaluate all other information that comes in. Right. So if you go back to the idea of Jesus being painted as a white man, in 1508 under Pope Julius II, that idea is what has been imprinted upon Black people's consciousness. So we think about Christianity subconsciously as the white man's religion, and we're thankful that we're being led into it, as opposed to recognizing that the first Christian church is in Antioch, which is in Ethiopia. So the first Christian church begins in Africa. Right. All of the folks who are actually doing this are African people. It's an African story. But again, because one idea has been anchored in us, it becomes harder to unanchor that idea and put a new idea in place. Right. And so part of it is also about why I think that we are so docile, because we feel like we're being invited into somebody else's religion, as opposed to it being our birthright that other people have appropriated. The same way that they have appropriated dance, the same way they appropriate the culture, they've appropriated an African religion and made it their own. Right, which is why when you come to our churches have all of the music and the vitality and the energy and the spirit, that is sometimes bereft in other institutions. Right,
yeah. Now let's go back to the ancestral thing again, real quick. Now, one of the things that I recognize in my walk, and as I continue to grow and evolve, is realizing how interwoven the idea of ancestral bonds are in the religion, because that whole, you go through the Bible and there's this long lineage that we can continue to talk. So this person begat this person begat that. Right. Ancestors weren't important, it wouldn't have been in the Bible. But somehow as Christians, we have missed the tie and the bond to our ancestors for whatever, well, I guess it's just the way you said, because of the way we've been anchored.
And part of the anchoring works through the media, right? Because all of the stuff that deal with ancestors always presented as voodoo or witchcraft, right? And never about the idea that, like, because back in, most of us got folks from the South, and we used to always have there was always an empty chair, right? For ancestors, always some kind of way of passing on ancestral wit. When we look at our children, our grandchildren, we always say they look like, Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so and so on. So it's always been there. But again, if you feel like you are seeking permission to be in somebody else's thing and it's not yours, you don't want to do anything that might upset folks so they kick you out. And the question about ancestors is really about what lives in your blood. Like, you and I, when my mom moves on, I still have her blood is in me, right? And I have children, her blood is in them too. So part of this is also about ancestry as also a blood legacy, which is how we get to the whole idea of communion in the first place, right? That there's a symbolic relationship between taking the body and the blood of Jesus, because it's an ancestral legacy that's being passed on. We're being invited to be within the lineage of Jesus Christ, right? So and the sacrament is the way in which you ingest that body and that blood so that it becomes part of your natural ancestral legacy.
You're going too deep, bro. This idea that you just put out there, well, the way you framed it, rather, I'll put it that way, because we understand the idea, but the framing of taking in that blood to become part of that bloodline legacy, that wow.
Yeah. So again, what we're seeing is that basically like, you know, all of us are considered to be ancestors in that line with Jesus, right? But what puts us in that line is, one, the acceptance of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, and then the communion is a reminder that that blood is in you, that it flows through you, and that you have the capacity to pass it on to someone else. So it's almost an act of almost like transmogrification, like a shape shifting, right? So there's not a natural mechanism, right? But there's a spiritual mechanism by which you are placed in that bloodline,
Right.
and so we talk a lot about the blood of Jesus, right? We talk about being washed in the blood of Jesus,
Yes.
right? So we talk about being covered in the blood of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of what we're talking about here is the power that's in the blood, right? And when we pass on, you know, we pass on both good things to our children, our progeny, and bad things. We pass on traits for sickle cell, right? We pass on, you know, genetic markers for breast cancer, but we also pass on other kinds of attributes like, you know, athletic prowess, intelligence, conscientiousness, right? Like some of us come here and we already just like, you know, I can't really think of a time I decided that I was going to be politically conscious. It was just kind of there, right? But I look at my mom. My mom is that way. My grandmom is that way. You know, perhaps it was in the blood. My sister is that way, right? So to me, by us embracing the question of ancestral legacy, it's inviting us into a broader discovery of the blood that flows through us, that is part of the natural inheritance of our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren.
Wow, man, because, you know, wow.
So I tell you something. I tell you something interesting. So on my mother's side, my mother is the next to youngest of 12, 6 boys, 6 girls. All the men all my uncles were either ministers or artists or alcoholics. So when I told my mom I didn't want to be a minister anymore, she's like, well, look, you don't really got no artistic ability, so does that mean you're gonna start drinking? Like, you know, because they're looking at the inheritance on my side of the family. Them are the options that's kind of available to you. So if you ain't really rocking with the church like that, and we know you don't have no artistic ability, man, are you sipping? Like, you know, so so when you look at my life, or you look at the choices I've made, there is a ministry there, right? There is this whole idea of speaking life into people, just in a slightly different way. So I still have adopted a ministry in a sense, you know, and I'm not much of a drinker, so, you know, but I do write. So there is some artistic, you know, artistic outlets there. But my mom was seriously concerned. She was like, yo, you know, and when people ask me, you know, about the, you know, Saber always teases me about the sermon, because, like, you know, I was like, I think the sermon was "I remember when," and then every time she was, I remember when," and when people ask me, like, well, why didn't I remain on the path to be part of the clergy? And I always tell people, like, you know, Bible says many are called but few are chosen. I wasn't either one of those, so I kept it moving, you know. I wasn't called, I wasn't chosen. And, you know, one thing I was clear about: whatever you believe, I wasn't gonna play with God. I knew this much. I knew I liked chasing skirts too much, and I knew that I didn't want to be that kind of minister. I didn't want to be the kind of minister where everybody had to make excuses for my poor behavior because I was good at being a minister, but not good at representing the faith properly. And unfortunately, you know, I was able to be aware of that and be like, yeah, that's not really going to be a good look for me.
You know, anybody who's watching, these are the type of conversations we used to have for hours, just deep, and then bursting out in laughter right at the same time, and then just go deep again. You know, it's funny because I remember a conversation we had. It's got to be probably about 85. It maybe late 84, definitely in that 84, 85 time frame. And you said to me, you know what? You and I are almost alike. And I remember thinking, I ain't like him. He ain't like me. But then see, something you just said there, because see, my dad was, somebody told me they saw, outside of your mom, saw me being a minister. And I didn't see it. I didn't see it, nor did I want to see it. And I had the same point of view as you, that even if I had something forcing me and pulling me into that life, spiritually, I wasn't ready because I was still too much into everything, all my fleshly pleasures that I wanted.
Right,
For the
right, right.
same reason, I do not want to be that guy that when you come to my church and say, oh yeah, that's Pastor Ron, and that's his kid by this woman, and he got another kid over here by this other woman, and some other woman suing him for palimony. And I didn't want to be that poor representative of what I'm trying to get people to follow by still acting the way I was acting. And I spent the majority of my time prior to becoming a minister making myself unworthy for that calling, man. So
Yeah,
yeah.
if you don't mind, could I share the story about how I ended up writing you that letter that I sent you
Oh,
about?
man, you're
Yeah.
gonna make me cry.
So I'm saying this as an example of how sometimes God speaks to you whether or not you are actually practicing that particular faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was living in DC. I did my PhD at Howard University. So I was living in DC, and literally I was driving, and I was riding dirty because my tags wasn't up to par, and 500 pulled me over, right? And so they pulled me over, and the officer's like, "Look, man, I'm gonna give you a break. Just get your tag straight. I'm not gonna give you a ticket." And so I pulled off. I'm like, "Thank you, thank God, that." And I got this image, and this image was, that I needed to reach out to you to tell you that, that whatever you were doing, you weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing.
Mm.
And that you were meant to be in the ministry. And I remember saying to you in the letter that basically part of that it was your wife's ancestors that were saying they wanted you to do this because it was going to make her life better. Like that basically, they weren't trying to hook you up. They were trying to hook her up because she was married to you, and that a lot of your success was going to come from your ability to love on your wife the right way.
Right.
And that if you could honor that God was going to open doors for you to be able to be a minister. And I remember telling you that I sat with that for a while because I'm like, yo, I ain't talked around in a minute. Like, this gonna just bust up in brother's spot. Like, yo, whatever, I don't know what you've been doing. Whatever you're doing, you ain't supposed to do it. You're supposed to be doing this next year. And so I remember like even writing you the letter and like, okay, like do I even send this, right? Because part of it is like we hadn't talked for a while. We had a falling out about the fraternity stuff and all that. So all this, we went our own way. So like this whole like, and I remember always thinking that when messages come, it's not your job to decide whether or not to pass it on. It's on the person's job to decide whether they want to receive it.
Right.
You pass it on, and then they got to do what they're going to do with it. So I remember, sending you the letter, and then you kind of anxious because you don't know how the person's going to respond, and then you hit me like, man, I've been crying, and this spoke, and so again, like Spirit works in different ways, and it moves us, and so all of the people who are being blessed by you and your wife in the ministry and the things that you all are doing. It comes from this cat that you was friends with from many years ago that's reaching out just out of the blue. So to me, you can't put limitations on how God works in a person's life. You got to just so for me it's like that message came to me clearly. I passed it on, and you received it, and you and Chantel, y'all have built a beautiful ministry out of it. And so again, it's just that example of like sometimes
I'm gonna tell you, bro, I still had that letter, and I recall vividly the day that I got it because we were on our way to Phoenix, and I said, I'm not gonna read it now. I'm gonna wait till we get to Phoenix and read it there. So we get to Phoenix and we're in the hotel room. She said, you go read the letter? So yeah, give it to me. She gives me the letter. I'm off in one part of the room. She's laying on the bed, watching TV or reading. And as I'm reading this letter, tears just start falling down my face. And what's the matter with you? I couldn't even talk because I was just so overcome with emotion as I read that letter. And as I continued to read, and I put it down, and I had to go compose myself, come back, read it again, started crying all over again, put the letter down, compose myself. She snatches the letter because now she want to see what you said. Right. What does she do? Put the letter down, go to get composed herself too. Just wrecked, completely wrecked. I have never had anybody write such meaningful, loving, and emotional words to me. I don't think I've ever read anything that was written quite you said something about This Is Us. I've noticed you were talking one of the episodes talking about they must have been writing from their veins. this letter, dude, was straight from your veins to the pen to the paper. And I felt every bit of that emotion in every word that I read. And like I said, I still have that letter. I don't even remember how many years ago. It's what, 10 years ago, maybe. But I still got that letter, and it was that powerful and truly, just as you're saying right now, a testament to how the Spirit moves.
Right.
And no matter your station or your position, God is still going to use you to get His message across. And boy, did I tell you, did it have an impact on me and my wife.
You know, and just to sit back and to watch the ministry grow, and to watch the ways in which you touch lives, and to watch, you know, I follow on Facebook when you have guest pastors in, and so all these other connections that you've been able to make, and the people who get fed spiritually because of your work, and the folks who fed into you and Chantel, and the ways that has blossomed is just, you know, further reminder to me that basically, you know, when you get a message, it's your job to really just do what you're supposed to do, which is to pass it on. And I tried to you know, Paul in Ephesians 6, you know, talks about the armor of God,
Right.
and what he talks about is the belt of truth, right? And so if you watch these young cats, you know, whose pants are sagging, when they try to run, they can't run because the pants can't. So the belt is what allows you to hold everything in position so you can fight, right? So the belt is what provides the balance for the fight. And so what I tried to do in the letter is just to be truthful, you know, not embellish, just to give you what was given to me, and to trust that that truth would provide the balance for you to be able to do whatever you were going to do with that. You know, and I think that's part of, you know, when you look at, I think Paul's Ephesians 6 about the armor of God is apt, right? Because it talks about, you know, the breastplate of righteousness. And it talks about, you know, so the way that you protect yourself, right? The way you protect your heart is by moving in the world in a way, you know, to try and do the right things the right way at the right time. And it talks about, you know, salvation being the helmet, and that the word of God being the sword. So if God didn't mean for you to fight, He just give you a shield. Right, you got a sword, right? So the sword means that you're supposed to be out there fighting, right? That's the whole idea. The whole idea of if you're only supposed to protect yourself, then all you would need is the shield, right? Which is the faith. The fact that you have the sword says that, okay, not only are you supposed to protect yourself, but you're supposed to be out there fighting. And so I think that part of and fighting grounded in truth.
Right.
So for me, part of the, you know, the invitation for Black folks here is that we are fighting for Black folks to be fully free. There's a truth there. And our issue is not about the fact that white folks are going to be white folks. The fact is that they're not allowing us to be free. They're standing in the way of our legitimate claim to be free, to be able to move through the world to with our own natural poetry. And so to me, you know, as a person that believes in God, I'm called to fight for that. I'm called to stand in truth, and to use my words, and use the Spirit to fight, to clear space, so that our children and our grandchildren have a better shot at being free. And you know, it's interesting that we know, you know, all the psychological literature tells us that Black folks in white spaces who have a pro-Black orientation do better than those who do not. In other words, pro-Blackness has a protective factor in white spaces. So when you're in a space, you know, and it's predominantly white, the fact that you are clear about being, not only clear about being Black, but feel good about that, it actually has a psychological protective factor. And those folks who are more part, like we are part of the Rhythm Nation, let love rule, I'm just human, those are the ones that actually have the hardest time in those environments, right? So there's some things that we know just about psychology that tells us, like, you know, raising your kids to have a healthy appreciation for Blackness, raising your kids to understand the value of improvisation, raising your kids to understand the importance of spirituality and connectedness, raising your kids to have a healthy distrust of white folks. In other words, distrust is different than mistrust. Distrust is saying, you know, I'm waiting for you to show me I can trust you. You know, I'm just not going to give it to you on credit. All of those things allow us to navigate spaces that are inhospitable. That's what allowed us to get through Irvine. A lot of you get to USC is like, it's not that you don't like, okay, I'm just against white folks. It's like basically you got to show me as a white person that you gonna show up and be fully human.
Mm-hmm.
You do that, then we can rock.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's an interesting concept. I was actually preached a sermon about 6 months ago that was dealing with adaptation. That I had done some research, and they were talking about a plant can adapt to a new environment in about a generation. That if this plant existed in a place that was flush with water all the time, that as that plant evolved over the course, or the environment evolved to where now the rain stopped and it becomes more arid, that over the course of one generation, future plants will adapt to that with deeper roots instead of shallower roots. And it made me look and explore this concept of, when we start talking about distrust versus mistrust, is there, or could there have been, an imprintation on the DNA of our ancestors being brought over here in Middle Passage that creates a level of distrust at a genetic level for many of us? Because it just sometimes, if you're just going to be honest, that a lot of us have a natural distrust. And some of us have never had a real bad experience with it, but there's still a something that says, watch yourself.
Well, part of this is what we call social learning theory, right? Which is that you don't have to have the experience to have you don't have experience personally to have that experience be imprinted part of your psychological development, right? So you don't have to get beat down like Rodney King got beat down to be able to understand. Okay, look, police are going to be dangerous to me. So there's some of that is just about what is being passed on, and if you look at the Middle Passage, well, you're talking about 3 months you're already in slaving dungeons. Mm-hmm. Another 3 months that you're on ships. So by the time you arrive here, you already understand what the dynamic is, right? You already understand that. The challenge for us is that studies have shown with Black kids, it's what we call the zone of proximal development. Studies have shown with Black kids that if you put them in an environment and they see images of themselves early on, they see that as part of their natural legacy. If you put them in an environment where they see images other than them, they see that somebody else's legacy that they get invited into, right? So you take this and say that in Bible study, right, or Sunday school, if young kids are seeing images in those books that look like them, they grow up in a Christian tradition, which they see it as their natural birthright. Mm-hmm. If you put them in a situation where all the images of white folks, they see it as somebody else's birthright, which they are participating in, and that has a profound impact on behavior. Yeah. Because if something is in you, you move through that differently than if something is outside of you. And an example of this is sports, right? Mm-hmm. Every brother think he just was born with natural. Every brother think that he can beat any white dude just because he's black. Whether he got skill or not, he just throw off the cut. I got this, right? But that's because we've been socialized to believe that it is something that is in us, right? And because we believe that it's something that is in us, the confidence that we have in moving in those spaces is different. And we know that confidence breeds competence, right? Which then breeds confidence, right? So if I'm in the church, I'm gonna make sure that the young folks there are from a very early age are seeing Black images, because it means that they will grow up with the faith in them as their natural birthright. So being a Christian is not something that they have to aspire to. Being a Christian is something that's just in them. It's just something that they have to do. And I think that has profound implications for why we are losing so many young folks to the church, because it's seen as being something outside of them as opposed to something that's their natural birthright. Right. And I think that if we can find ways to re-socialize young folks, like, look, this is your legacy, this is your history, this is your culture, then it becomes a question of me just basically extending myself. So how I move through the world, how I think about certain kinds of things, a function about how I want to spread my light, right? So I think there's some things here that psychology can teach us about, or share with us about, how we can be better in our ministry, better in how we socialize and raise up young folks in the church, so that they actually become not only good Christians, but good agents for social change and social justice.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we talk about agents of change, we have this, I've had the discussions with friends of mine who are pastors, and then of course people who are not necessarily pastors, but there's this discussion that exists on, I can't talk about this subject in church because it's going to make some of my members uncomfortable. Particularly when you're dealing with the time that we're in right now. We got this brother Floyd that literally got strangled to death on the street.
Right.
What do you say to a pastor that feels that I can't talk about this? I'm a Black pastor, but I can't talk about this because I'm going to alienate my non-Black members.
Yeah. So, hey, anybody who's a good pastor is going to alienate somebody every service. That's if you're good. Everybody at some point or another. If you was in the congregation, you felt convicted one way or another, right? Like after church was over, like you kind of shook the pastor's hand, but you didn't want to look him in the eye. You feel like the sermon was him talking directly to you. So, to me, if you're a pastor and your concern is about alienating folks, then maybe you're not doing it right. Right, like that. That's the idea is that people are supposed to be convicted because you're speaking life into them. Again, like this belt of truth. You're speaking into them something that compels them to change.
Right.
And we also know that psychologically speaking, people are more likely to learn when they are placed in places of discomfort than comfort. Right. So you're more likely, every time you read a book and you're presented with a new idea, you got to go back and read it again because you didn't quite get it the first time. That idea is more likely to be imprinted than when you read through something and think you just got it. So, So psychologically speaking, making people uncomfortable because you're speaking a truth is actually a good way of implanting the idea, right? And if you have a church where the issue is I can't speak truth because people are gonna be offended, then the question is, what is the quality of the ministry, and how are you helping people grow in your church?
Wow, that's I hope a couple of these brothers are watching tonight. So before we run out of time, because I don't want to keep you all night, let's talk about George, Brother Floyd.
Right.
So give me your perspective on that, bro.
So my perspective on this is that in America, the murders of Black folks serve as a ritual sacrifice. They serve as a mechanism their sacrifice on the altar of white supremacy. So in the same way, the story of Isaac and Jacob and having to sacrifice the son, and then the ram shows up. Well, we are basically that ram. We are, and so the deaths of Black men and women and children is meant to serve as a ritual sacrifice that says to white folks that whiteness has meaning, that whiteness has value, because absent that, the other issues come into play, like the inequity in white society amongst white folks, right? Like the majority of folks on welfare are white folks, right? The majority of folks who are going to get, so it serves that function. For us, what it also does is it serves to keep us afraid, which is different than fear. Fear is a natural response, right? Like you see something and you at that moment you have fear, but afraid is a state of being. Right. And people who have fear overcome the fear and fight, right? So if you ever see a mother and somebody coming for a kid, she might have fear initially, but she's gonna fight for a kid. Right. But if you're afraid is just a perpetual state of just being frozen and paralyzed. And the function of ritual sacrifice is to make us afraid so that we don't actually move. We don't actually do anything. We always feel that we are in a deferential position, right? So part of the challenge is to say, look, fear is a natural response, and that fear, like all forms of energy, can be used for good or for bad. The question is how you use that fear. Anybody who's ever taken an exam, there's some anxiety and trepidation, right? But you use that. Anybody, when you're preparing a sermon that is like, something that you haven't tried before, there's some fear, but you're not afraid because you give the sermon. So, part of it is also to recognize the function of state-sanctioned violence, what it does for white folks, and then and the message is meant to send to us. And so our challenge is not just about the revolts that we're seeing in Minneapolis or other places. It's about having that kind of sustained kind of intensity throughout our lives, right? And part of that is in the ways, going back to the theme of revolutionary love, part of that is Black love is also the anecdote, the ways that we show up for each other. Because in this context, we're not, what we're talking about the fatigue of Black folks. We're not just talking about the pandemic. We're not talking about just state-sanctioned violence. We're also talking about the fact that we also deal with the violence that we met out on each other and the impact of that, right? So it's cumulative. So we might have this public conversation. We want to have the discussion about the ways in which we are taking each other out. But in our house, we got to have that conversation too, because the cumulative effect of all of that has debilitating both psychological health consequences, mental health consequences, and physical health consequences for us. So I think that part of that is also, us speaking truth to power, us holding churches accountable in terms of like, why is your church closed on Friday and Saturday? And you also talking about we ain't got no parks, no community spaces, right? Why that's also a way to invite folks, and you can show a movie. It's a way that you can sort of minister to people and sort of show your light through what you do.
Right.
And so I think that idea of revolutionary love is important, because for Black folks in this society, to love on one another publicly is an act of revolution.
Yeah.
Right. The whole system is designed for that not to happen. Right. That Barack Obama would not have been excoriated the way that he was if he was married to a white woman. The fact that he was married to a sister that was clear she was a sister created a different kind of iconography for white America that was troubling, even as it was, soothing for us.
Yeah.
Right. That nobody wants to see Black folks build together and love together, because if that happens, then anti-Blackness can't take hold the way that it has in our society.
Wow. Yeah, that's here again, another where you leave me speechless. It's the idea of iconology, is powerful. I know it's powerful because we see it in religion. I mean, we have these images that we have uphold as icons, and we see that people do that with other people. And I think you hit on something that a lot of people don't consider or have not considered: the powerful, iconic image of Barack and Michelle Obama. Not just as president and first lady, but as a loving president and first lady, that even to this day, people still look at the current occupants of the White House. And it's not just the difference because of race, but because of the way they interact, the willingness to hold hands or show public affection. Even so much, I think one of the things I loved most about them, or at least an image, was not them hugging and kissing and embrace, but one time when they were just doing a dap, it was just like just being unapologetic. Two people from South Side of Chicago. This is who we are. This is my dog right here. That what their love transcended just this husband and wife thing. It was, this is my ride or die, and we dapping it up right here.
So much so that most people who supported Barack Obama they can't really identify policies, right? But they identify that relationship as being critical, right? Like so, that's an important piece. The other thing I want to leave listeners with is an analogy I like to use, because I think it helps us understand the importance of culture as a protective factor in our community. So let's just say that it's an analogy I use about the saltwater fish and the freshwater fish. So let's just say that you decide that you want to set up a freshwater fish aquarium. So you buy all of the things necessary for the freshwater fish aquarium. Once you have it set up, you introduce the freshwater fish into the freshwater fish aquarium. And now you see that the freshwater fish are thriving. They're doing very well in the freshwater fish aquarium. And someone says to you, well, it seems unfair. Why don't you integrate some saltwater fish into the freshwater fish aquarium? So you integrate the saltwater fish to the freshwater fish aquarium. And you notice that while the freshwater fish are doing great in the freshwater fish aquarium, the saltwater fish are struggling. And then you start to, the saltwater fish don't swim the same way that the freshwater fish swim. The saltwater fish don't talk the way that the freshwater fish talk. How come the saltwater fish always got their pants sagging? How come the saltwater fish women always wearing all these colorful hairstyles? And then, you get a few saltwater fish that have been able to adjust. And so they have sort of assimilated, and now they start talking. They might even be on the Supreme Court. You might have, and now these saltwater fish are now talking about, what's the problem with these other saltwater fish? And so while both these assimilated saltwater fish and the freshwater fish are talking about, why don't the saltwater fish do well on the freshwater fish scholastic aptitude test, right? And why don't the saltwater fish, behave like other salt, right, like the freshwater fish? And why don't the saltwater fish see female freshwater fish as a standard of beauty? Why they still think that women's saltwater fish is still the standard of beauty?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's having these conversations about what is the problem with the saltwater fish. No one is asking the question about the water. That the ecosystem that the saltwater fish were introduced into was designed to privilege, to enhance the culture and the experience of the freshwater fish.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you send your kid off to college, if you send them to a benign white institution, you're essentially sending saltwater fish into a freshwater fish environment. And so all of the struggles that even now in Irvine, we see in the counseling center, that the majority of the Black students go to counseling centers because they're having difficulty adjusting to an inhospitable and toxic system. Now we know that most saltwater fish can't survive in freshwater naturally. There are actually only two types of fish, 2 or 3 types of fish that can. One is salmon, which are known for swimming against the current, right? So those folks who are revolutionary or have it in them, again, goes back to the whole pro-Black kind of orientation. And sharks. Sharks are actually a saltwater fish that can actually survive. So those folks who have that Black Panther kind of mentality, I'm going to fight at all costs. So what we're seeing is in our society, the folks who actually end up navigating the society better are not the ones who think that they should, assimilate fully, but rather the ones who recognize that their strength is in being a saltwater fish and find ways to adapt to that ecosystem. So again, this one reason why when you look at Black churches look different than white churches, is because basically the ecosystem is designed to enhance the experience of Black folks in that space. And when you take away, culture is the people as water is the fish. And so everything in your system, your ecosystem that allows you to thrive is rooted in your culture and your understanding of that culture. And everything about when we send our kids off to these public schools and the colleges is designed to take out the salt and make them just regular freshwater fish. And part of the challenge and part of what we try to do at the center is to add some salt to the water, right? Like to add some salinity so that these saltwater fish have a better chance of surviving in an ecosystem that's inhospitable.
Yeah, that I told my wife, and I've probably told several other people this same thing, this idea that, I have some very well-meaning people in my life that are not Black. And who I believe that I would label as good people. But this idea that they seem to repeat, I don't see color, doesn't sit well with me, because as far as I'm concerned, part of what makes me is my color. I mean, everybody, when you see me, whether you know anything about me or not, what you see first is Blackness. And my big lips, my wide nose, my big head, my big butt, and everything else that goes along with being Black, as you were talking about before, this natural rhythm that we seem to possess. I even said, it's one of the things I love about your post when it becomes sundress season. That is literally, I've seen you write stuff about that as a poem, a love letter to women, our sisters wearing these sundresses, because when you see a sister move, it's a powerful image.
It's poetry. It's poetry. Look, it's a gospel of another kind. So it's good news of another kind. But I want to go back to this point about the whole idea they don't see color. Well, let's start with this. White is the absence of color, right? So what people are really saying subconsciously is they see you as honorarily white, right? Because if I have a Granny Smith apple and I have a Macintosh apple, if you don't see color, they just apples, right? But everybody knows that you can determine a Granny Smith apple because it's green. It tastes different. It has a different kind of experience. So if you're making an apple pie and I sold 2 apples for you, you tell me you don't see color, you should know which one to pick.
Right.
The fact that you can decide which one means that you see color. In this instance, what it means is that when they say don't see color, it means that they see you as an honorary white person, right? And because it's the absence of color, it's the absence of history, and it's the absence of culture. But the other thing is that by not seeing you, they don't have to see themselves.
See, that's the piece right there, because it's then that's, to me, the message is I don't see you, and I have to be seen because I exist.
Right. And so part of it is that if they see you as Black, then that means they have to identify themselves as white. And white works in society because it operates as the invisible signifier, right? So we have Black psychology, we have Asian psychology, right? We have Latino psychology, but then we just have regular psychology, right? So whiteness, so white folks don't have to say white psychology. They get to hide whiteness as being the invisible signifier for what psychology is, or what medicine is, or what history is. So this is world history. We don't have African history over here,
Right.
right? And so part of it is when they say they don't see color, it means that basically they don't have to. They get to keep themselves invisible. They don't have to show up as being a white person, as having a culture and a history and a relationship to that history. They get to impose that power on you without actually having to show themselves. You know, and that's the piece. Like so when I'm in rooms now, like I don't do the whole people of color. I'm like black people. Like because once I say black people, it make everybody got to square up different.
Yeah.
When you say people of color, everybody get to hide. Like, you know, like people of color solidarity. Well, we look at George Floyd, there's an Asian officer standing there watching him being choked to death.
Right.
Right. Like, so it ain't just people of color, right? We got a history in this country of, you know, tensions between black folk and Latinx folk. Right. When I've traveled, when you're in Cuba, or you're in Brazil, or you're in Peru, black folks are still treated the same way in them countries as they're treated here. So this whole idea of like people of color, that's not true. Let's call the thing what it is, right? Like, and again, you know, black people, let's identify who we are. And I think that's an important part of making, inviting folks to come to the table to have honest conversations about how we go forward.
Right. Yeah, man. I think that's a perfect way for us to wrap up tonight. I mean, I know that I had some other stuff I wanted to talk about. I know you wanted to talk about it. So that just gives me the perfect excuse just to say, hey, bro, let's do this again.
look, look. Everybody's on lockdown, so where else you gonna be, right? Like, where else you gonna be? So, you know, so yeah, so I would welcome the opportunity to come back and talk, and if listeners have questions, you know, because there's a whole lot of stuff I like to talk about in terms of just like black psychology and things that we can extend to your congregation, to your listening audience, to help them in terms of working with their children, because now everybody's at home and folks getting on your nerves, and how you process dynamics and all of that. So I'll be,
hey, since I was actually, I had a vision of doing what I wanted to call a Saturday seminars. I had, one Saturday do a financial workshop, especially during COVID. Another one was going to be about the Second Amendment rights for Black people, how important it is for us to have those rights and to exercise those rights. Another one would be for psychology and the psychological dynamic in the shelter in place and how to relate with people in this, and another one on growing your own food, gardening. We got one of the members of my church is a certified master gardener, and it's like people, if this thing a second wave hits and we see what we expect to see, where there's going to be food shortages, how are you going to be able to survive and take care of yourself if you don't even know how to grow your own food? I mean, you may not be able to slaughter a cow in your backyard, but you certainly can grow some collard greens, right?
Right.
So
yeah, so like I said, if you invite, the answer is yes. So often you invite, man, like I said, we go way back. We family. So as often as you invite me back, I would like you to share the interview that I did on Wednesday on your page, so that folks can listen, because there's some good information there about surviving the pandemic more broadly. And I'm on Facebook, so my page is public, so folks can always hit me up there too, and DM me if they're looking for some mental health advice or whatever. I'm available to serve the community, bro.
Yeah, and so and on that note, since you are making it available, you spell his name Adisa, and then Ajuma, and people always
Ajamu.
Ajamu. I'm sorry, I didn't want to mess that. I messed that up, and I messed it up. But it's there, so you guys could go ahead and hit it up. This brother's been a long time friend of mine. I'm so glad that we did reconnect all those years ago, and that we were able to at least and now be able to connect here, because I think it was important, and I think it'll be important again, and when we do this another time. But you certainly have had a lot to say, and I took, like, your interview on Wednesday, it just resonated with me to hear those things that you were saying, and it resonated with me. So I listened to it all the way to the end, straight through. Didn't stop. I just went straight through to listen to it, and then actually went back to listen to it again because there were some pieces I wanted to read. Wait a minute, he said something else I don't remember, but I remember it stuck. So definitely going to do that. So, brother, what I would want you. Well, first of all, thank you, brother. I love you for this.
I love you too. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thank you. What I would like for you to do, typically, it's been preachers has been on here, so we, have them close out in prayer. So I want you to bless us or pray for us the way that is fitting for you.
Okay. I offer this prayer in the name of God, the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent one, the maker of all things visible and invisible, physical and metaphysical, immanent and transcendent, sacred and secular. This God that is known by many names, that is sometimes called Nkulu Kulu, that is sometimes called Ngai, that is sometimes called Yahweh, that is sometimes called Jehovah, that is sometimes called Yahshua ben Pandera, that is sometimes called Jesus the Christ, that is sometimes called Elohim, that is sometimes called Allah. This one God, whom though hidden is a source of all power, all wisdom, all knowledge, and all strength. I pray that his divine power speak through us in our actions, in our words, in our deeds, and that the power of the ancestors speak through us in our actions and words and deeds, and that we make this world truly just, verdant space, a world in which we, our people, and our children can live, love, create fully, and stand and walk in the warmer sun.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right, brother. Thank you very much. I'm gonna let you the rest of your night, but I will be reaching back out to you to get us set up for part 2 and the seminar too.
Let me just say this, man. All those years ago, that letter was like a few loaves of fish, and you managed to turn it into a meal that has fed the multitudes. And I'm proud of you and Chantel and what y'all have done with your ministry, and it's an honor, to know you and to be able to have served you in this capacity, man. Love you, and see you soon.
Hey, brother, and I echo the same comment to you of my love and the proudness that I am to be able to say that you are my friend.
Yeah.
So
Thank you very
brother.
much, man.
All right, brother.
All right. Good night.
Good night. You have a good one.